continual reflection on what evidence survives. When I say that Bodh Gaya has not been studied in terms of its ongoing history as much as its past history, i.e. via Cunningham, I present these two images. On the left, the earlier view of the pavement before it was covered with marble, a lifetime. You can see.
We are not able to see the screen.
Can you hear me still?
Yeah, I am hearing you, but I am not able to see which you are talking about.
Abhishek?
Yeah, Jenny, I think you should go ahead and finish the presentation. I
Okay.
think. Fine.
All right. So in other words, in addition to taking all of those old historical photographs that are scattered throughout collections and bringing them together to give a more robust sense of the history, a sense of its ongoing history needs to be developed. This, I don't believe, has been in any kind of institutional or comprehensive way been actually charted. And this is one of the significant aspects of the center for me. Before that history is lost, that we might begin to see when these changes after the renovations of the 19th century took place at the site. And finally, as an art historian, I want to emphasize that we have to keep looking carefully at the images. As the one I showed of Abhishek looking at images in the Mahant's compound, we have to keep questioning what those images mean. And this is something I've worked with for a very long time, trying to emphasize that these Buddha images, where he is touching the ground, are not just images in reference to the narrative of the attack of Mara, but are also images of the site. And the fact that they become popular only after the 8th century is significantly reflecting certain changes in devotion, certain practices of people who we otherwise no longer have much record of. So the images, in fact, are witnesses to a variety of things. It is this sort of interpretation and continual study, I think the center could, if constructed well, actually help audiences of all different kinds begin to reflect on what it is we see when we look at Bodh Gaya. All right, and with that, I'll stop.
Thank you, Janice. That was wonderful. I have a lot of questions, but we can wait for that.
Okay.
My request to the audience here is not to interrupt speakers when they are presenting. Please wait until the end. Our next presentation is by Manish Sinha, who is professor at Magadha University. Manish, on to you.
Thank you, Abhishek. Being born at Gaya and teaching history since the past 24 years at Magadha University, I have had the opportunity to witness the transformation and internationalization of Bodh Gaya, which used to be a small, unhappening semi-rural town, into a Buddhist spiritual hub, and its reinforcement as the holiest place for the Buddhists. So Bodh Gaya, in fact, has been an integral part of my growing up, being taken there for the occasional childhood picnic, praying at the Mahabodhi temple, eating hot samosas at the shops in front of the entrance of the Mahabodhi temple. We grew up with the excitement of the visit of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And the belief was that whenever His Holiness arrived, rains would come along with him. Much has changed over the years, with now Bodh Gaya becoming a World Heritage Site. And its reinvigoration as the holiest Buddhist site, which draws both the followers of the Buddha Dharma and the late tourists from all over the world. Now, this proposed multimedia digital center, which is being initiated by Deshkal Society, it would indeed be a very valuable resource, And what I premise is that I would be concentrating on the shared religious heritage aspect of Bodh Gaya. And this shared religious heritage is both from the Buddhist aspect as well as the shared religious heritage belonging to the Hindus also. So I'll be talking about it. Now, being at Magadha University, what I can do is that we can have number of linkages with my department with the university, because my university is in Bodh Gaya. Yeah, as you must be knowing that the land for my university had been donated by the Bodh Gaya Mahan itself. So it is in the heart of Bodh Gaya. But the basic role this heritage center could play, what I would like to, there is a lot of noise in the background. So the basic role this heritage center could play, look, the thing is what I observe as a local, that by and large, the local population, because Bodh Gaya has a diverse visitor profile. So there is a large local visitor profile also. By local, I mean the lot of Indians also, apart from the people from the Buddhist pilgrims from trans-Himalayan regions, from Europe. So basically, there is an ignorance about the real heritage of Bodh Gaya. So we need to inculcate, we need to make the people who are there about the shared religious heritage also. And when I talk about the shared religious heritage, I also mean the living heritage of Bodh Gaya. The architectural aspect, Professor Mac Deeg was talking about, Professor Jessica Leseko was talking about. Of course, a lot has to be studied there, and in the previous presentation by Dr. Jessica Leshako, she was talking about the ongoing part of the architecture. So I am interested in the ritualistic aspect. Now, if we the ritualistic aspect of Bodh Gaya has been instrumental to a very large extent in the internationalization of the sacred space of Bodh Gaya. And this ritualistic aspect, ever since His Holiness arrived at Bodh Gaya in 1956 as part of the Buddha Jayanti ceremony, and later on the exile started in 1959, he gave the initiation to 162 bhikshus at Bodh Gaya. In 1960, the democratization of the Tibetan polity started. In 1974, the first Kal Chakra initiation was held. And recently, in 2019 December, from 1 to 6 January 2020, in fact, he was giving teachings at Bodh Gaya. And 2017, we had a Kal Chakra Puja. So whenever these Tibetan rituals, they have fascinated me, and they completely transform the spiritual aspect of Bodh Gaya. The young monks, the young monks with their beads in hand, the elderly monks chanting prayers to themselves, whispering prayers to themselves, permeating spirituality all around. That is indeed a fascinating sight to behold. Now, all these rituals, they can be connected to the larger. I would like to link the Tibetan national question also here, because these pujas like the Kal Chakra Puja or the Mulnam Pujas, apart from being social and spiritual platforms, they also are being used as and they should be, for espousing the nationalistic cause of the Tibetans. And in fact, Buddhism is the most dominant marker of the Tibetan identity, and it is the basis of their economic survival also. And it is what has been communicated is that the Tibetans have preserved Buddhism in its real form, and with its patron saint, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Of course, it revolves around his personality, which has been instrumental in the internationalization of Bodh Gaya as a heritage site, notwithstanding that it was declared a heritage site in 2003. So I'm really fascinated with it, but I would like to also spell out that we need to document the diverse religious practices. Even when we talk about the Tibetan rituals, it is not also homogeneous. We have got the four major schools: Kagyu, Nyingma, Gelugpa, Sakya. They have got their own practices. And even I have been studying Tibetan nationalism, in fact. So I am looking these rituals from those points of views also. So even the protests which they do, they are not homogeneous. For example, non-violence is the dominant marker, and that is how the Tibetans are positioning themselves with their vision of a modern Tibetan nation when their nationalist cause is settled, where they can duly take their place in the modern world, where non-violence and peaceful world is going to be the mainstay of this vision. But right, but when you observe closely, there are variations in these rituals also. There are variations how they are interpreting Buddhism also. For example, even their protests. For example, self-immolation is also justified. The Raksin school, or maybe the non-violent protest is there. There are marches. There might be the sit-ins. There might be the sit-outs. So these need to be studied. And in the documentation center, I have been observing the Kalchakra pujas, and I have been interacting with these Tibetan activists. And I will particularly take a name who's a very dear friend of mine. He's Tenzing Zundu. He's a firebrand Tibetan activist and a writer. And he writes about immigration poetry. And his most famous book is Kora. He wears a red bandana, and he has vowed not to take it off until the Tibetan national question is resolved. So on 22nd February 1920, he was I had invited him at our department where he talked about non-violence of the Dalai Lama and Mahatma Gandhi. And what he said was that Dalai Lama is in the non-violence of Dalai Lama is in my heart, and the non-violence of Dalai Lama, I keep it in my head. So I think from my head. So, and he basically survives by selling his books, and he's very active on the lecture circuit also. So in different ways, these people are also very important. Their writings should be documented. What their literature has to be need to be documented in this center. I am also talking about, of course, that whole Tibetan national movement, it is a digital movement. Of course, they are doing it. But in a digital center, we have to look at these things also from our point of views also. For example, their documentaries, the movies they are making, how they are talking about their identity, how they are talking about sovereignty, how they are talking about their nationalistic questions, how are they navigating the different contestations in the religious practices and social practices and so on. These need to be looked into. And another thing, apart from these rituals, one thing which I would also like in this documentation center, which should be an integral part, is that Bodh Gaya has been also a religious center for the Hindus. So that part cannot be neglected. For example, when you enter the Mahabodhi temple, there are on the left hand side, there is the Panch Pandav Mandir. Opposite the main entrance of the Mahabodhi temple, you have the Vagdevi Mandir. So these shrines also need to be studied, and how they have, how Buddha, how they worshipped Buddha, and how he was encompassed in the Hindu religious domain. And even as a practicing Hindu, I also venerate Buddha. So we need to look into these things, the ritualistic aspect, the living heritage aspect. And I would like to talk about the documentation part also. One thing which is very useful, which is right available at Gaya, that those are the Jajmani records. The Jajmani records of the Gayawal Pandas when they used to visit Gaya. And as you know that in Bodh Gaya also there are several sites of offering Gaya Shraddh. So these Gayawal records, they have been preserved since I think 16th or 17th century. So of course the Gayawal Pandas are very secretive about it, but nevertheless these records have been digitalized by the University of California also. So when we delve into these records, they will also give us a valuable insights about the tourists, particularly the Indian tourists who were coming to Bodh Gaya, how they were visualizing and how they were worshiping Buddha, how they were including Buddha in their larger domain of worship. So, and being at Bodh Gaya, teaching at Magadha University, living in proximity to Bodh Gaya, So I could be offering whatever help or whatever limited resource. Of course, I am much overawed by the by the Buddhist scholars who are present here. I am really so privileged to be a part of this so acclaimed academic gathering, and I thank Sanjay ji, and I whatever help he would require, he would ask from me, and whatever he would find suitable for me, I will dare to be also the most forthcoming in association with this project. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manish. We move on to our final presentation by Dr. Priyanka Jha. On to you, Priyanka.
Thank you, Amar. I hope I'm audible. Everyone can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful. So very warm good evening to everyone. And at the onset of my presentation and some thoughts that I've been pondering over for some time, I would like to thank Deshkal Society for this wonderful opportunity. My association with Deshkal Society has been a very fruitful one because the first meeting that we had, the first dialogues that we had in 2018, I remember I presented something on the lines of invoking somebody like Anagarika Dharmapala, who becomes very important in the universe of Buddhist revivalism. And to a very large extent, what we have today in the form of the Buddhist custodianship can be contributed to the works of Anagarika Dharmapala. So being a political scientist, being a theorist, and a person who engages with a lot of thought, today I thought it would be interesting for me to introduce you to another thinker that me and Janice kind of share a certain kind of affection towards. That's Ananda Kumaraswamy. So the way in which I have designed this presentation, in the first half, I want to talk about some ideas of Kumaraswamy, and I would tell you how he becomes important when we are talking about heritage. So many people would invoke, I know the tussle between the thought people and art historians. How do we invoke Kumaraswamy? A lot of art historians would consider him as the first sort of art historian of modern India, but as a theorist, I would like to read him as a thinker. And because his ideas become so important on art forms, he also becomes one of the first votaries of bringing culture into the frames of the normative of the nation. And when we talk about heritage, it is very important in terms of the embodiment of the embodiment of the cultural self in the nation. And at that note, I would like to congratulate Deshkal Society for thinking on the lines of having something like this heritage center, and the presenters before me very brilliantly articulated on the possibilities of how can we do or how can we go about this heritage center. Saying that, the other part of my presentation would be based on what I call as people's heritage. What I would like to talk about is in terms of People's Heritage Center. How can we think of this multimedia heritage center as a people's center? So starting with Kumaraswamy, his time frame is 1870s to 1947. So he stayed for a very long part of his life and wrote extensively. And he basically, one argument that I would like to bring of the many works that he wrote, some of his texts like Message of the East, Essays in National Idealism, Meaning of Art and Craft. So in all of these texts, and some of his speeches, he's making a very important argument. So he's saying that, why art forms are so important. Art forms are important because they are the conception of a race. They are racial conceptions. A lot of meaning of who we are is derived from these art forms. These art forms become important not just in terms of the larger idea of what the nation is, but also what the civilization stands for. There's something called the civilizational matrix that he kind of identifies East with. And he says that these art forms are very important. So when he's making an argument like the racial conception or the racial sort of positionality of art, he's trying to say that preservation of art forms becomes very, very important. It is very interesting because he's making this argument during the time of the national movement. And there's a certain kind of urgency of the political, social, economic quest, and somewhere the cultural quest is not really given that kind of importance. Therefore, in 1910, when he has his first exhibition in Banaras, he's making a very strong argument for the museum. He's saying that it is very important for India as a nation, as a foundational structure of its larger civilizational matrix that the East present, to have our museums. Because museums are the link to the past. Museums are not just the storage of various artifacts, but basically takes you to your past. It takes you to a certain kind of historical context in which you know what your ancestors were thinking, in which you derive what were the larger sort of imaginations, depictions, representation. So they become very, very important. And in the absence of these art forms, there's a huge possibility, in the absence of a museum, there's a huge possibility for you to not really know your own self. So this becomes a very important way of connecting not just to your past, but also connecting to the kind of self that you were once. And what is being lost? See, these arguments are also becoming very important because there is the context of British colonialism. And in the context of British colonialism, there's a lot of constructions which are being made. See, let's not forget that one of the most important justification of Pax Britannica was based on this argument of the white man's burden to civilize these people, to civilize these barbaric people. I don't have to really reiterate the kind of text that came, whether in the form of Catherine Mayo's Mother India or in the form of Mill's History of British India, in which a lot of unkind, stereotypical, prejudice-laden constructions were made. So when Kumaraswamy is making an argument of the art forms, and when he's making an argument of the self, he's also deconstructing it. He's also challenging these Western interpretations. He's also challenging these stereotypes, because when you have a museum is just like an iota of his understanding. But when you have a sense of who you are, you can use that to critique all these construction and to reinstate the notion of the self. So he's using it very, very brilliantly. And I would say that he's somebody who makes a lot of sense even now. Now, how do I invoke somebody like Kumaraswamy when we are talking in contemporary times? We don't have colonialism. We don't have any of those problems. He becomes very important because the notion of having something like Heritage Center is to be able to connect to the contemporary what this space entails of, what this area entails of. And let's not go into the challenges of defining it as a Buddhist site or a Hindu site or a secular site, but this is a very important site. For me, as a scholar trying to understand the significance of sites in the larger national or in the larger psyche, these sites become very, very important because they are the sites that connects you to your past. Now, saying that, how do I see this multimedia center? You know, there's been a very interesting shift in the way we've been writing history, and the category of people's museum or people's heritage site is not something that I'm drawing I am drawing it from a sense of history. There's been a major shift in terms of the way we've been writing history. And I think one of the most important sort of vantage point for me is Zinn's People's History of United States of America. What is this people's history? When I say what do I mean by People's Heritage Center? When I say People's Heritage Center, this center needs to be rescued from an expert mentality. This expert mentality of experts telling what needs to be done, rather engaging with the common masses. All those images that I was seeing that Janice was presenting actually gives a very strong support to my argument, because people, the common masses, people who've been living with these artifacts or people who've been living in these sites have been the real custodians. They've been holding on to these for such a long time. So when we have something like this Heritage Center, it is important to involve them, not just from the perspective of training them or telling them, but listening to them. I think one of the major critique of many of these developmental projects, there's been a major sort of shift which has come in also the way we look at development. And when we say that we need to go to the grassroots, we need to listen to people, we need to have community involvement, we need to have community partnership. All these are basically an alternative way of looking at development. It is an alternative way of doing things. We've been doing this for such a long time. There have been so many efforts of preserving a lot of sites, but till the time people don't really get this sense that they are the real owners or they are the real custodians, we've seen that many sites have been neglected. So maybe for some time we can use a lot of resource and create this documentation center or multimedia center. But I think the longevity of something like this would emerge when people are involved in this, right? And people would be involved when we identify, for example, I remember Bijoy has done this brilliant work of doing the gazetting work, and he's found out lots of artifacts which are around the region, these cultural resources which have been just lying and now being documented. Involve them, bring them, ask them. Because when we go into the mode of training, there's an element of elitism. We go as an elite and we try to inform them, right? We try to educate them, assuming that they don't know this or they would not know this. When these artifacts or these resources which have been lying for so many years, either in a temple or in a public community space, that means they know exactly how to preserve it. Because by the end of the day, this entire enterprise is for the people. I must congratulate the way the whole plan has been drafted. How the documentation would take place, how we would be bringing these courses, how we would be engaging with them. And I have some examples. I am not I will not take. I will not fall into the error of not giving some examples of where people's participation has really happened, right? Or how there's people's heritage center which has been there. There's so many examples in that I can draw from Europe, but let me just draw some example from India. Ahmedabad city. The reason why Ahmedabad could manage to do a lot of its preservation was because of the involvement of the common masses. They do this very famous heritage walk. If you get the opportunity of being in Ahmedabad, you must definitely do that. So they do this long walk from the temple to the mosque, and they take you to the common houses. They take you to the houses of the people. You go and you see how people are living, how people are very much entrenched in their culture. Rajasthan is also a very interesting example whereby a lot of communities have been taking care of very important historical sites. So Jaisalmer, if you look at the the so-called Golden Fort, if you go inside the fort, you would see that it is the common people who have taken on the responsibility of refurbishing, of cleanliness, because of keeping it the way it is, preserving it. So custodianship, not just for name's sake, but in terms of real involvement. See, there's been a lot of arguments which have been going for a very long time, like how do we make it People's Heritage Center? Not just for the name's sake, not just in terms of stakeholdership, not just in terms of a top to bottom approach whereby certain people are sort of trained and they would go on and disseminate, but work with the communities. I would be very glad. I've been involved with Deshkal Society on this front, and I would be very thrilled to be able to work with communities. And we know that there's so many communities there who've been drawing on their livelihood on the basis of this site. Let's talk about Bodh Gaya. Let's not call it a site, but maybe the entirety of city. And in many things, the way they would know the local knowledge about a site, about a space, is just so wonderful that it makes our job easier. So when I am saying that we need to have, I am not saying it is a people-centric approach. It is an approach which is coming from people, from common masses, because going back to Kumaraswamy, when he talks about the significance of art forms, when he's talking about significance of culture, he's making a very important argument saying that, these art forms are central to common masses. They are not just fancy items that they sort of keep, the artifacts, but they're producing it. Their livelihood is based on this. So their understanding, their meaning is coming from a very engaged sort of entanglement, right? And when we are talking, and now we know that UNESCO has also been working very extensively trying to tell us about tangibles and intangibles, and the way there's been a major shift. I think as a political scientist, I can sort of map how institutions have been working, and institutions are saying that it is not just enough to say that we're going for a top to bottom approach. We are going for a very decentralized approach. I think what I'm trying to say is that we need to move beyond decentralization. We need to be completely not just listening to them, There's another thing that you listen to them and then you do certain changes, but involve them, like being equal partners. Because if we are not in partnership with them, if we are not engaging with them at an equal footing, not just going as experts and saying that, listen, dude, we know more than you, but being able to take from them, listen for them. I think one of the most important possibilities that I see about this heritage center is emerging from listening to them, asking them what are the possibilities that they would like to bring on when there's something like this heritage center. Speak to the monks who've been there, speaking to the various monasteries which have been there, because they know the local problems, they know the everyday problems. Because many of us, like Amar, everyone here, Abhishek, most of you have worked, spent a lot of time in Gaya, and you know the local sort of realities. But there's always transitions. Communities always are in a mode of transition. Societies are always in a mode of transition. People living in those communities, people who are part of those communities, are not just better informed or educated, but they know what would be the possible ways of making this a huge success. And drawing from my own personal experience, when I was in Ambedkar University, there was this wonderful neighborhood museum that we were trying to do in Mehroli. And very recently, that project has been approved. Delhi government is completely involved, and Mehroli will have its first neighborhood museum. I will quickly take 2 minutes and end my presentation. So in this neighborhood museum, people are just bringing in their old heirlooms, they're bringing their old stuff and placing it. And every time there's a tourist that goes, it is the people who would be telling them about these artifacts or these cultural knickknacks. So I think that's a great way of getting into it, because by the end of the day, if we are trying to have something like this heritage center, this heritage center would be for the common masses. So I think a great way of doing this would be with them. So so exactly that. And I am really excited. I also have personal reasons for being excited about this project because my roots are from Bihar. And I remember saying this to Sanjay sir when I met him in 2018 that I really want to give back to the state which gave me a sense of who I am. And I think this center would be a great way of me to know my roots better and giving back to the state of Bihar. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, for sharing some of these ideas and being part of this wonderful project. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. That was wonderful. So now we have a little bit of time, I assume. Sanjay ji, can you clarify? Do we have time for some questions and discussion?
I'm just requesting kindly to get the response from the distinguished participants for 10 minutes.
Okay, okay. So we have time for a few questions, pressing questions actually, for 10 minutes. Are there questions, comments? If you have any, please raise your hand and I'm happy to call on you to. Janice, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
good. Again, thank you all. I think Priyanka has summed up well what all four of us were saying. It's not just one perspective. And in fact, the multiple perspectives that are represented here is a way forward to give education to the people in the area, as well as to scholars. If I went on longer, I would talk about the fact that so much that was correct has gotten muddied by various kinds of groups. How do we show that? We don't do it with a single line, nor even a single perspective. As absolutely necessary as the local perspective is, we need to show people how to look at the past and how we have so many questions that cannot be answered by it, i.e. the value of thinking. So I appreciate everybody today.
Susmita Dutt.
No, here I'm sitting with my wife.
Okay, oh, sorry. Sorry.
And it was my question.
Please go ahead.
Actually, it sparked off from what Priyanka was telling about involvement of people and people-centric approach will make any study or even the idea become more useful and perhaps more engaged for people.
Okay.
I thought that along with what we are thinking of the heritage or living heritage, I thought one of the biggest living heritage is people created heritage, and that is where the people are involved. What we usually know, and I have very strong objections for this nomenclature, and that is the folk artisan. I would say every one of them are folk artists. They are artists and not artisan. They are not artifacts, but they are art products. And these art products have a genre. As much as in the music field, you have classical, you have within the classical, you have different genres, or even the pop sector, you have different genres in the music. Rock is different than soul, and soul is different than reggae, and all these things. And if you like them, then you address them as individual art form. Similarly, Bodh Gaya, or the period when Bodh Gaya was at its primacy, they were influencing a lot of different civilization, and each one of them have a living heritage which is continued to live now. Whether you go to Madhubani and the Madhubani paintings, or you do any of those areas, and you'll find that even what we call tribal, uh, the heritage lives on. So there have been certain adaptations, but still with them, the heritage lives on. And I think we should do firstly a listing of all the living heritage, which has been simultaneous along with the as time has passed by over these 2.5 millenniums, and a listing of living heritage, and then going to my find the artists. And there are a lot of people who are significant. They are artists. I know, but they would be called craftspersons. They would be called, whether they are in textile or they are in the designing of earthenware, terracotta. We call them kumhars or something, but all of them are persons who have kept this tradition alive. So I would sort of urge that you consider this sector as well to be, and perhaps firstly list every heritage, a living heritage which has been influenced by Bodh Gaya, or the period when Bodh Gaya came about. Thank you.
Manish, please keep it
Huh.
please keep it brief. Actually, everybody, so that we can
Yeah.
hear more
You
people,
know,
voices. Yeah.
regarding the documentation and the listing of the heritage, I am the coordinator of intact chapter in Gaya. The chapter has not started yet, but we hopefully by January or February we'll be having a full-fledged chapter here. So we have done the listing part, and we are under the direction of Professor Vijay Chaudhary, who is present here, who was supposed to be the moderator. So a number of Virasat Yatras had been also organized. So I agree to this premise, this postulation, that there has to be a people's participation. Then only you can have any workable heritage project going on. This is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Priyanka, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Yes. Thank you. I would just reiterate what Professor that Rekha Datta was saying, that, but just to bring, this is Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay who says that it's so important for us to make these terms inclusive. She worked so extensively, and prior to her, somewhere the idea was to always call them craftsmen. And she goes on to not just bring gender inclusivity, saying that the right way of referring to a craftsperson is craftsperson, because women are also craftsperson. So just it was just like a little historical facts, and we must acknowledge the brilliant role of Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, who becomes so central in the universe of the revitalization of arts and crafts in modern independent India. Thank you.
There is somebody called Prachi Jha here who wants to say something.
Yes, very good evening to one and all present here. Actually, I have a question. Being a youth of the country, developing country, what can we do to preserve the our heritage, to remain connected with our ancestors? As Dr. Priyanka, Professor Priyanka said that we should involve the common masses. So, what can we do?
Okay, we'll let Priyanka answer that question.
Thank you,
Unmute yourself
Prachi.
here.
Very, very important. What can we do without the youth and the young people? Because in the real sense, we are preserving all of this for you. So a sense and awareness of, various art, not just art forms, but your roots, your heritage, and whatever little site you have around you, or I don't know, just being more aware, being more involved, not littering all these places. I think that's the first thing that we need to do, is not to throw these packets of chips and write the love stories on the walls. That's something that I could think of very quickly.
I think this is where we can end. Before we all go, I just wanted to say two things. One, that we see a nice overlap between all of these papers, right? I mean, when we think of heritage, it's not one thing or the other. It's kind of entangled narrative that we are looking for, and I think that's the vision that we have for the Heritage Center in Bodh Gaya. Secondly, as I see it, based on my experience in the region, we are the ones looking for the heritage. The people are living with the heritage, right? It's not heritage for them. It's part of their everyday life. We are the ones who use the term heritage for them, right? That's been my experience, because we tend to look at them as Buddhist or Hindu, like Janice was pointing out, that there is a way in which we look at images, right? But people live with them. It's integrated in their everyday life. You see Buddha images as a goddess image somewhere. There are a number of examples in the landscape that you will encounter in South Bihar. And so we are the ones looking for the heritage. For people, it's not heritage. It's for them, it's part of everyday life. It's really well integrated, right? So they have always been stakeholders, right? There is the tension here is not between scholars and the people there. The tension is between state and the people there. So having said that, I think I will pass it on to Mohammed Nosaf to actually say a vote of thanks to everyone.
Hello, everyone. That was such an enriching and informative session with a lot of stuff to work on into the future. And it is with much pride, therefore, that I would take up my duty to give the vote of thanks to each and every dignitaries and the distinguished speakers, as well as the participants. Thank you once again. Thank you so much on behalf of the Ishtar Society.
Thank you.
Okay, have a nice evening or morning or afternoon, wherever you are, depending on the time of the day.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Evening now for me.
All the best, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a very fruitful weekend and also the remaining days of the conference, and perhaps later.
Yeah.
Can we get into tomorrow through this same link? No?
We can ask Muhammad to send us link. I think he can send us link so that we can log in tomorrow to participate.
Yeah, I would definitely do some of it as well. And thank you all. I think, Abhishek, you absolutely nailed it. Entangled. That's and we can't separate it. We cannot separate it. We each can speak from our own perspective, but it's entangled. Yeah. Thank you.
Max, you have time today?
Sorry?
You have time today, or we should plan for tomorrow or day after?
Maybe tomorrow I'm traveling, so probably let's say before Christmas Eve.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, just drop an email and then we.
I will.
Together.
Okay.
Next,
Bye.
take my best wishes to Cardiff. I studied at Swansea.
Oh, see, but I'm not in Cardiff. I am in Germany, which I feel is much safer than the UK at the moment.
Okay. I thought that I read that you were in Cardiff. Yeah.
No, I've been in Germany since the lockdown, so since March.
Okay. Good.
I'm not sure if they will let me in again, but we will see.
Yeah. We'll all
Not anymore.
No, it's okay. I got settled status now. It should be okay.
All the best.
Yes.
Thank you. All the best to everybody.
Bye.
Abhishek,
Yeah.
have a conversation soon. Okay.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I'll call you.
Okay, great.
Okay.